Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Dave, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, man. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Yes, thank you very much, Robbie. It's great to be with you and your audience today. My name is Dave O'Brien. I'm an author of two books on the JFK assassination. I've been researching it since age 13 in 1965. And finally, in 2019, I wrote a book called Through the Oswald Window. And that dealt with some of the physical evidence in the case, as well as I named what I believe to be the nature of conspiracy in that book, and it went very well. I was very pleased with it, and then I followed that up with a recent 2022 release of JFK Case Not Closed. The subtitle is Key Evidence Dismissed, Ignored, Altered, or Suppressed by the Warren Commission to frame Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin. And I did that in partnership with Johnny Cairns, and I was really pleased to be able to say that he's a young, dynamic researcher, and I think that he's the future. His ilk and people like yourself, young people that are interested in the JFK assassination, is where this is going to be. I believe the case is going to be solved in the next 15 to 20 years, and I think it's people like you and Johnny that are going to make that happen.
When it comes to getting started in 1965, I mean, you were 13 at the time when you started this. I mean, I guess it really impacted you in such a way. I mean, I'm finding about it way later, but it is, I mean, to start researching at 13 years old and then spend all this time, even today, still doing it as well, too. It had some impact on you. Where'd you get started when you were 13?
Well, I lived in Toronto, and I was always interested in the JFK assassination. I was really upset when the assassination occurred. A year and a half or so went by, and I developed a relationship with a bookstore owner in Toronto, and he happened to go out and get a copy of all 26 volumes plus the summary edition of the Warren Report. He felt he could sell it, obviously. And he allowed me to go into his basement and just start reading. I started with a summary edition, of course, and I just started reading every day after school. I would go there. I'd spend like 3-4 hours there, and I just took notes, and I just was insatiable. And then I started reading every of the 26 volumes of the Warren Report. It took me 18 months to read all of it, and the notes that I had from it. The thing that jumped out at me the most, even at that young age of 13 or 14, was the glaring omissions, contradictions, the use of evidence where they suppressed a lot of the evidence, pushed it into the relevant evidence, into the summary editions where very few people would ever read it. People don't realize that they published millions of copies of the summary edition, but literally just a few thousand copies of the 26 supplemental volumes. So people really didn't read anything except for what the Warren Commission wanted them to read, which was the summary edition. I went through the whole thing, found that there was so many things missing from the summary edition that just pointed to conclusions that didn't match what the Warren Commission was telling us about Lee Harvey Oswald, about the events itself, the conspiracy versus one gunman, that type of thing, and a lot of suppression of the evidence, and that's why the subtitle is what it is. And that got me going, and I just couldn't stop. I started writing off to people, and as you have made contact with a lot of researchers, and I was surprised to find that Dr. Malcolm Perry responded to me in 1968, and we exchanged 3 handwritten letters over the next 4 years, and the significance of that is that he was very reclusive. He even the museum in Dallas has virtually nothing on him because he refused to do interviews, or he was hounded by the press. He didn't like the way the Warren Commission handled him, and so he just went reclusive. And so I had this little tiny window with Dr. Perry, and I have since donated those three letters to the Sixth Floor Museum in Dallas. And so that, of course, just enhanced my interest in the case. And I started to go to Dallas. I met up with Penn Jones Jr. He became a friend of mine, and he gave me the grand tour. He took me to one day. He took me to Mary Farrell's house and just dropped me off. And he said, I can't go in there because we never leave if I go in there. And I was shocked when I went into the house. I think the expression today is hoarder, but with her, it was nothing but JFK materials of every kind of description you could imagine that just covered every room of the house, every table, it was just unbelievable on the floor. And I spent a wonderful half dozen hours with Mary Farrell. And of course, when you start to do that and you meet fascinating people like Penn Jones Jr. or Mary Farrell, you're hooked. And they were impressed, or not impressed really, but they were intrigued by the fact that I was a young Canadian boy and I was about to become a newspaper reporter. And and they were very helpful to me along the way. And I wasn't going to let them down after they passed by just letting it go. And so I've stayed on it, and I've got two books to my credit now with that, and one with Johnny Cairns. And so that's my story to this very day, and I just can't let it go.
I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here. When it comes to the Warren Commission, did you notice that the stuff that they printed, even if the conclusions kind of didn't add up, but that summary report, that was just for the public. They knew people weren't going to really dive into this. It's much like people trying to get interested in the assassination now. You say it now, either people roll their eyes in the terms of conspiracy, or they're just like, it's too far gone. I mean, trying to get people to care about stuff from a week ago is a little bit difficult, but it was, if you looked in the volumes and the things didn't add up and its conclusions didn't add up. I mean, did you start noticing that like this was kind of a show? That's what I thought of the Warren Commission. It was a cast of blue ribbon, these government people that all had either a super credit to them just so they can put their name or face on it. And then the public would accept that. Well, those top dogs did their investigation and they came out with the conclusion it was Lee Harvey Oswald. But when you really start digging, it's like, if you have no, I guess, heat to you or any credit, then when you're trying to rebuttal this type of thing, people just go, well, you over them, come on. There's like 13 people or whatever that said that, there was Lee Harvey Oswald that did it. And then we know so much more now where it's like, oh my God, like imagine if a lot more people that like, I don't know, half of those committee members, I know some of them were dissenters, but if more of them, started being dissenters about it, would the public, I mean, would have gone 60 years without, this answer of conspiracy.
Well, you know what? That it was a fascinating era, and I don't know if a lot of certainly younger people may not know this, but the Warren Commission for the first 12 years, the Warren Commission was the most ideal propaganda information ever created by a government of any kind. And what I mean by that is that the Warren Commission assembled and held their hearings in private, not allowing Oswald to be represented in any way, shape, or form, as he would have been in a public trial. And the Warren Commission went about doing its study, knowing that Lyndon Johnson, the 35th president or 34th president of the United States, was going to suppress many of the documents for 75 years. So the Warren Commission had the liberty of doing whatever it wanted, saying whatever it wanted, presenting whatever it wanted, knowing that nobody would take issue with it until 2038. Well, two things happened that started, three things really that started to pare that away. One, we had independent researchers like Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg and Penn Jones Jr. start to write about it, interview witnesses that did not appear in the Warren Commission report, and in their small little worlds at the time, started to chip away at the credibility of the Warren Commission and the Warren report. And so we have that to be thankful for. The second thing was, in 1968, there was the creation of the Freedom of Information Act, which they couldn't have foreseen happening. And so researchers like me were able to file writs in Washington and start to get out documents that were classified about the assassination of President Kennedy, whereas they were all supposed to stay there nice and snug until 2038. And the third thing, of course, was 1975, when Geraldo Rivero, and he showed the Zapruder film for the very first time on TV. And when people saw the Zapruder film and they saw the president's head snap violently back and to the left, it was a literally of what the F moment right across the country, because that just didn't jive with what they'd been told for 12 years. So imagine that you've got a 12-year head start, Robbie, where everyone's under the impression that this gold ribbon panel of distinguished Americans said Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. They had 12 years propagandizing that. And then finally it started to slowly tear apart, go apart. And now we're where we are. And the House Select Committee on Assassinations, as you know, said there probably was a conspiracy, although they couldn't identify those involved. And so, but for that first 12 years, there was that something like 89% of the American people believed that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Now, 73 to 75% of Americans believe that there was a conspiracy and more than one gunman to kill President John F. Kennedy.
The idea of conspiracy going on for so long is because the public is not satisfied. When it comes to the Warren Commission's findings, when it comes to the HSCA's findings, I think if you look at the Warren Commission is more like Oswald did it, and we're going to show you how. And then the HSCA was like, release some stuff, but nothing that's obviously going to make us look bad. And it's like, well, what's the truth then? If the truth is going to make you look bad, then we should know it, right? I mean, that's when I talked to Blakey, he was like, he was told, when you go into this, try and keep the reputation of these people as when they were alive. Don't embarrass them or, make them look bad. And I go, and I know people never want to talk about the scandals with JFK or anything like that. But at this point, I'm just like, you're going to come across it. You're going to find some stuff. I was like, I just want the truth. I want to find out what is in there, what has been delayed for so long. If it makes the agency look bad, I mean, you can look at the 21 release and there's Garrison's attempts to embarrass the agency is a name of a document. And you're like, that's not good when your government's, talking about you like that. They're supposed to work for us. So whatever they're keeping secret, I start to wonder. And then when I started hearing about Oswald being intelligence, I'm like, wait, what? I asked Blakey that question 6 or 7 times because he kept saying, yeah. And then he would say something like the Warren Commission painted him out to be a loner. We know that's not true now. Um, but I find the 201 file that they destroyed. And then there was a request. Did Oswald interview for the CIA? And they were like, no. And then it's like 8 months later, 9 months later, and they go, we have this agent, Demencia, that says he debriefed the person that fits Oswald's description of working at a radio factory in Minsk. We never classified that as a debrief. I'm like, legal language. What are we doing? And then you look at the Warren Commission. That's all legal language. Look at the secondary committee. It's crafted by young lawyers. And you have to think they're going to put whatever they have to, or they're going to do whatever they're told to create a document that's going to fit whatever narrative that their overseers or their bosses are telling them to do. I mean, that's basically Arlen Specter in a bottle. And then they base their whole careers off that.
Yeah, exactly. And the HSCA, in my opinion, and I've since learned, 90% certainty rubber stamped the Warren Commission report, and they hid things. They deliberately hid things like some of the medical evidence to its own forensics panel that was headed by Dr. Michael Bodden at the time, and Dr. Cyril Weck, who I've become very close with. He and I have discussed this in great detail. And it really wasn't, Robbie, until the Assassination Records Review Board, in which many, many files were released, and some of the, and none of them, or many of them for sure, were complimentary to the Warren Commission and what the report they put out. And so it's, I think that we have signs that the conspiracy is starting to fall apart. And then I think, again, over the next 20 years, between young researchers like yourself and modern technologies that I discuss in the book, JFK Case Not Closed, I think we are closer to the truth than ever before. And I wish I was 40 instead of 70. So, but I'm not. And hopefully that's what I leave behind is the hope that this was going to be solved, and don't give up.
I wouldn't call myself a researcher, but I definitely have a little bit of an interest. But when it comes to Oswald, what evidence did they have against Oswald? I've heard like the backyard photograph. Well, he had all three things that were going to incriminate him. And that's even to me, I'm like, I would stay agnostic on that. I know some researchers are agnostic on some things, but that's like, I feel like there's way other better evidence that you could have to just show that there was obviously something going on here. And the idea of a cover up and obviously blaming Oswald for something. But I mean, what would you consider that you looked at when it came to some evidence against Oswald?
Well, it was mostly all fabricated. Um, and Johnny Cairns points that out in 4 chapters that he writes in JFK Case Not Closed. So, for instance, the Warren Commission talked about tying the rifle to Oswald, talked about this 3 shell casings that were found at the window, and tied that to Oswald and the weapon. The paper bag that Oswald allegedly brought the weapon into the book depository building, he personally constructed using company tape and paper and stuff like that. In Commission Exhibit 399, and that bullet itself, and how valid is it? But it was traced to the Oswald rifle, and therefore, and then they said it was the single bullet theory, and therefore that enabled them to say Oswald acted alone. Whereas we know that if you can establish that the single bullet theory is incorrect in any way, shape, or form, then there had to have been 2 gunmen. And so the Warren Commission spent a lot of time with the physical evidence trying to tie it to Oswald, and successfully did so because, again, for 12 years, that's all people knew of. And then, but if you read the 4 chapters in Johnny Cairns' book, he talks about problems with possession of chain of possession, and the evidence itself, how one of the shell casings could not have possibly have been fired that day. So it obviously it was planted there because it was damaged, and it could not have been come from the Oswald rifle and ejected at that very moment that the president was assassinated. So there's thousands of little things like this that have not at the actual evidence that the Warren Commission would have us believe that proves that Oswald acted alone. And and I think that's where the excitement of this case lies, is that when you look at the evidence finally and you apply modern technologies to the existing evidence, the physical evidence, the autopsy x-rays and photos, the bullet C399, the shell casings, the rifle itself, all the evidence that the Warren Commission touted against Oswald, it falls apart really fast. And so it causes you to think, okay, if Oswald had lived to stand trial and he actually had a defense as opposed to no defense for literally the first 12 years of his death, then what would have happened? And I believe that he would have been acquitted. And personally, this is where I partially deal differently than many of my fellow researchers and authors. Is I believe Oswald was involved in the assassination. I just don't think he fired a shot that day. I think his job was to ready the 6th floor sniper's nest for the actual assassin. And what he didn't realize was that his rifle was going to be brought and left there. The shell casings fired from that rifle was going to be brought and left there, and everything was going to be pointed toward him. And that's the way it ended up unfolding for history. And but again, if you look at the evidence, and I think this is where we're trying to get young researchers to look at, is the evidence itself. If you do that, you shake your head and say, how did they ever arrive at these conclusions? It's ridiculous.
Well, could you walk me through some examples of some of the evidence that obviously breaks apart once you start looking at it?
Well, so the rifle itself was that Oswald was the backyard photo authentic. Certainly, Marina Oswald's testimony is very shaky on that.
Well, the
The
rifle is well, they use Marina's testimony to pin up that rifle example. But even when I had Posner on here, I showed Posner that the HSCA proved that Marina couldn't identify the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. Like the HSCA gets a lot of crap, but some of those court hearings that they had really exposed a lot of stuff. If you look at it, particularly in the volumes too, and there's Posner said to me, he said, well, she heard him reloading it on the back porch and all of this. HSCA proved that wrong as well, too. She didn't care what he was doing. It was the most dysfunctional relationship. Most couples would have split up or and something in that case, but she was like, I don't care what he was doing. Whenever he had that rifle, I just stayed away from him. And then there becomes weird parts in her testimony where it starts going into I locked him in the bathroom because he threatened to kill Richard Nixon. And I'm like, bathroom's locked from the outside. You're telling me this guy who's 145, 160 pounds was able to be stuck in a bathroom? Like it's just to me, there's a bunch of stuff that just started not making sense.
Well, also when she pinned, literally, in essence, was the only evidence to pin her husband Lee Oswald as the shooter in the General Walker incident in April of 1963, and her story, it changed quite a bit. And like, for instance, she said that when her husband came in, he had the rifle. So we're led to believe that he had a rifle and he carried it on a public bus and in 1963, and nobody said anything about it. No, there's no witnesses came forward, just her. And that when he came in, he was flustered and sweating and obviously very emotional about having just shot at General Walker. And so that she wanted the Warren Commission wanted her to say that this was showed that Lee Oswald had the capacity for violence. And yet we're also led to believe that Oswald could be a cool cucumber 9 months later in taking position on the sixth floor window and shooting at the president of the United States. It just doesn't add up. And if you look at Johnny's four chapters, he goes through the rifle, the bullet, C399, the paper bag, and various other kinds of physical evidence, and he breaks it down. And you just there's no conclusions you can reach at this point because the evidence is so old. But the one conclusion you can reach was that this evidence was misused in order to frame Oswald as the lone assassin, and that's where we are today.
Well, once they say like we have fingerprint evidence that on the rifle, on whatever, the general public doesn't know too much about fingerprint evidence. I don't even know too much about fingerprint evidence. So then they just kind of tune out. It's much like the medical evidence. Once you start diving deep into that, it's like the general public kind of starts walking away a little bit because it's a bunch of scientific terms. And unless you actually look into it and know a little bit about it already, you're not going to be able to raise a flag or question it when it comes across you, I guess. But they lifted his fingerprints. Either they lifted his fingerprints or they got it from the police station. I mean, that's a valid point, is they already had his fingerprints from the police station. But there is that video that we saw where they did go into where he was laying and then take his I don't know if you've seen that video before, but so that brings up the question, what was that about? I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, do you think that when it comes to enough evidence to, I guess, put him in court? I mean, he was already trialed by media. Media already posted him as the killer of the president, and that's what people were seeing on magazine covers and news stories. And I think just recently they just started saying alleged, which is good. I like that there's a turnaround, but I've seen some articles now that say alleged assassin. And I think, that's for the longest time, they just would have said lone assassin.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I'll tell you, it's the more I've been doing this for 55 plus years, and the frustration level doesn't lower. It keeps going and goes up. And but because you can read 1,000 different books on conspiracy theories, and I put myself one day when I was I guess around the 2015, it occurred to me, if there was somebody new that was had an interest in the JFK assassination, and they said, "Oh, I'm going to read up on this and figure out what's going on," their head would explode because you can pick up all kinds of books about conspiracy and who did it and who was behind it and who murdered him, and they all have built very viable, strong cases. And so, where do you go from there as somebody who's interested in the JFK assassination? And I think that's where we've lost our way in the last 30 years, is that we've become conspiracy oriented instead of evidence oriented. And I think so, in trying to get people back to the evidence, trying to get a new investigation into the assassination, which is a very active process right now. And I think that once that happens, I think that people will be able to get involved, younger people like yourself, and say, "Oh wow, like this really went on. This is how he was set up. I mean, this is what they treated, how they treated evidence." It's mind-boggling, and I think we're going in the right direction finally after going in a misdirection for about almost 40 years.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Penn Jones is the one that said that you find one aspect of this case and you research the hell out of it. And I think that was to the conclusion that everyone that researches their own individual aspect would come together and share their information and build up all the pieces to the puzzle. But that didn't happen. It turned into debates. And then everyone thought that their piece to the puzzle was the whole puzzle. And then that's kind of where you see the back and forth fighting. I mean, if you all agree a conspiracy, despite who did it, let's just look at the main investigation that gets taught in the history books and try and show how that obviously wasn't an investigation at all. It was pinning the blame on Oswald. And then there's your opening door. There's where the general public can get interested on it. Like, I don't care if you say a mafia did it or the CIA did it or Oswald had it. I've had times where I thought if Oswald took the shot at Walker, he didn't take the shot at JFK. It doesn't make sense. There's two opposite political spectrums. So I haven't absolved them 100% yet. I don't know. There's some stories, like I said, if you dive down one certain group, you think that's the whole group and you get stuck in it. But you mentioned setting up the book depository building. You think Oswald set it up for someone to take the shot. What led you to that conclusion?
Well, I think that first of all, it makes sense because for people to think that Oswald didn't wasn't involved at all and was set up by people he didn't know whatsoever is completely nonsensical. What is far more likely is that he was part of a small cabal of people who were involved in the assassination, and they turned on him, and they made him the patsy that he claimed he was. He was, and I think that that's a far more realistic thing that happened. And I think the other thing that made me really question a lot of this kind of stuff is, and I was the February 15th of 1979, and I was 27 years old, and I was granted rare access to the school book depository building when it was locked and sealed from the public. And I wish, if there's one thing I wish I could do, Robbie, I wish I could take everyone who's interested in the JFK assassination one at a time, go to the book depository building, go to the sixth floor window, take down the barricade they have now because you can't go to the sixth floor window, and go stand exactly, or you have to kneel actually, kneel exactly where the assassin was on that sixth floor window and look down into the kill site. And if you do that and you just take a few common sense moments to do that, you will be shocked at what you see, and you'll come away realizing a number of things. One, this was an absolutely idiotic sniper's nest for an individual to pick as a lone assassin. So in other words, if you're a lone assassin, it blows my mind that anyone, Oswald or whoever it was, would have picked this particular window to carry out the assassination if they were alone. And the second thing is it when you look down into the kill site, you just realize that the assassination, as described to us by the Warren Commission, simply could not have happened the way it did. And a lot of the why nots for that can only be seen from that window and are never presented in the Warren Commission report. And I documented that quite extensively in my first book, Through the Oswald Window.
Now, when it comes to the cabal, who do you think was involved?
Well, there's evidence that he had ties with groups like Alpha 66, pro Castro Cuba groups. He had CIA connections through his friend David Ferry. So it's a mixed bag, and I think that the waters have become murkier over the years because of the elapse of time, and so we don't know, and whether this could ever be resolved through the release of documents that still exist in the National Archives. I don't know, but certainly there was more to Oswald than just an innocent, set up person, young man who was maybe emotionally distraught. He was a deeper thinker than that, and I think that I don't know who he was associated with, but and I think we'll get to that at one point. Hopefully, we'll get to that point. But I believe, and I align myself more with Robert Blakely with this, and I think that there was an organized crime and CIA rebel elements of CIA, and they all tie into. If you connect the dots, you've got Ruby, David Ferry, Lee Harvey Oswald, Oswald's uncle, Dutz Moret. You've got all kinds of people that are they're right there. And if you connect the dots, you go, holy moly. This connects to Carlos Marcello, the crime boss of Louisiana and Dallas and Texas. And it ties to the CIA, although rebel elements of the CIA. I don't think the CIA took Kennedy out, but there were rebel elements that were not happy. For instance, due to the Bay of Pigs invasion that failed. And then so where does organized crime come in? Well, organized crime, certain elements like Santo Trafficante, Carlos Marcello, well, they lost a lot of money when Batista was overthrown by Castro, and he took over the casino operations. And that cost them millions of dollars a year, and that's why the CIA formed a relationship with organized crime to undertake the Bay of Pigs invasion, and because the whole idea was to take over, get Castro back out, reinstate Batista. The organized crime has its casinos back; they're happy. The CIA is happy because they got rid of a communist dictator just some 75 miles off the shores of Florida. And so I think that's where, to me, anyway, if I'm going to align Oswald with somebody, that's who I think it may be. But I'm not 100% sure.
Did they ever pin Oswald for the murder or add on the charge of General Walker shooting? I know General Walker wrote a letter and he said that there were two men that allegedly took a shot at him. And it wasn't Oswald, this lonely loner. And then I found a document from RFK when he did his own investigation because he concluded that Walker was using it for political gain. Like, oh, if this guy took a shot at me months before he killed Kennedy, then all you Kennedy fans, come vote for me or whatever that idea or madness kind of is. But there were witnesses that saw the Walker shooting that said that there was two people, and that gets labeled a conspiracy. I'm like, well, there's documentation that a little boy saw it. He was building furniture, and there's so much about the case that gets labeled as like, I don't believe this because it doesn't fit my theory. And I'm like, well, what's real? If you have a testimony from someone saying that they were there and they saw this, I mean, did they fabricate that? I don't know.
Well, the question becomes, how did the Warren Commission handle that? Is there any mention of a witness that saw two men to corroborate Walker's claim? I don't think so, because they were more interested in only one thing, and that's making sure that, say, hey, Oswald took the shot at Walker. He showed the proclivity for violence, and so we believe he then shot Kennedy years later because Walker didn't agree with Kennedy. So it's, again, very murky because of the passage of time. But again, just you've given us a great example of, again, how the Warren Commission handled evidence and narrowed it to Oswald acting alone in both situations, Walker and JFK.
When it comes to Oswald, if you're going to defend him, did you look into, his background, his childhood, a bunch of all the other stuff? I know people bring up his psychiatry exams. I like to think that he definitely had a relationship with his mother, whether you want to say it was good or bad. She just knew so much about him, like he was a CIA agent and all this stuff. And you could say, oh, it's just a mother being passionate defending her son. But I mean, I'm 24 years old, so we all say we hate our mothers, but we really don't. So it's that type of thing where it's like she knew so much about him. So either it was Marina feeding information to her, or it was Oswald communicating a little bit back and forth.
Yeah, I agree. Marguerite Oswald was, I mean, by all accounts, she was a nut bar, and how that affected the Oswald growing up is probably not good. But I don't know that there's anything conclusion to be drawn from there. The thing that I'm more interested in is Marina Oswald, and I think she's got a lot that she could offer still, and has not. And I don't even her children are pretty interesting. I think the two daughters are. I can't help but feel that they know more than what's been said so far, and it's been relayed to them by the Marina side of the family, and and so I think that in the future, I think that if we delve into Marina Oswald and what went on not only in the Soviet Union, but when they got back, she had a relationship with Marguerite Oswald. There's just so many aspects of her testimony against her husband that also break down. That and she's been given a pass. And I think that while she's still alive, I think we should do everything that we can to have a formal inquiry where she's subpoenaed and called in to overview the all the evidence that pertains to her and her husband's relationship. And I think that may show some very interesting observations when that occurs. At least I hope so.
With Marina's testimony, the lone nutters that defend say, "Oh, Marina, she pointed out all these things." Well, she switched her testimony later. I mean, she eventually went to the conspiracy side of things. I think her last interview was like 94 or something like that. But she was getting threatened with deportation. So it was like throw your dead husband under the bus, or get sent back to a different country and lose your kids. So I understand that. I don't when I look at the testimony, I go, you just can't trust it. You got to kind of push it off the side. Even if she switched to the conspiracy side later, you kind of just have to be like, she's just unreliable to have in court. But when it comes to the evidence against Oswald, what's the hardest one that like you even had maybe some problem with, like trying to at least clear Oswald from? Like, was there a good piece of evidence that they used against him or had on him that you found like you couldn't get an answer for?
Well, I think if you add up all the physical evidence and the fact that there's nothing really in the physical evidence that is so ironclad that it had to be him.
Pubic hair on a blanket.
Yeah,
That's weird to me. I know they have Jack Ruby's mother's dental records in there, but when I saw that document, I was like, why?
yeah. I mean, if you look at just the paper bag, for instance, and Johnny does a good thing with this, that the commission insisted that he constructed the paper bag himself on the premises, and yet could provide no evidence as to when did he do that. Nobody else saw him use the materials. He had no access to all those materials after normal work hours. The supervisor of that area never left the area, even had lunch there, and never saw Oswald make an attempt to make a paper bag. And yet it's convenient that the Warren Commission has this paper bag that supposedly contained the Oswald rifle, that they can now say was used to assassinate the president because it was Oswald's rifle. He was the assassin of JFK. And so when you look at each piece of evidence, physical piece of evidence like that, what astounds me is that there's nothing that I can look at and say, "Oh my God, yeah, boy, that really defines his involvement as a sniper." There's nothing, and that's so it's the totality of all of that, Robbie, that just drives me crazy as opposed to one piece of evidence. There's none. It doesn't exist.
I think with the curtain rod story, a lot of people would say that that was the rifle that was disassembled. I have hard trouble believing that, but I mean, seeing a rifle in the book depository building and the number of people that called it a Mauser and then eventually switches later. I mean, I believe that they definitely swapped it out later, but my question is if they picked it up from Ruth, I don't know who they got how they got the rifle there. That's the big trouble for me is like, was that Lee's rifle at a point? I think later it became Lee's rifle, but still, there's a lot of confusion right there, whether that was media's fault for reporting live when, the president was getting rushed to Parkland and they were calling out a bunch of different names on things and kind of people would hear that maybe a little bit, turn off the radio or do whatever. And it's that confusion aspect. When we get to do you believe that there was a Mauser that was at the book depository building and do you believe that they switched it out later?
I think it's entirely possible that that is the case because I don't think the Oswald rifle was used in the assassination at all. So that means there had to be a second weapon. But with the so-called Oswald rifle being at the book depository building, it accomplished everything they needed it to accomplish, which was tie it to Oswald and name him as the lone assassin. But yeah, I would very much agree that I'd be not surprised that there was a Mauser or some kind of weapon there that was actually used in a more precise manner because of the nature of the assassination and what was required by someone shooting from that window. The Manica Carcano, as you know, was a terrible, terrible conditioned and accurate weapon that Johnny goes into in the book and does a great job with. And so, again, all these years later, when we look back at the physical evidence that we accepted for so many years, then it starts to break apart. But and the Mauser is just one example that you raised.
I mean, that sniper position out that window is like one of the worst like tactical advantage spots if you're going to do something like that. I'm like, what happens if you miss? Like, I've known people skepticize that there was 2 lone nuts that day that were obviously taking a shot at Kennedy. I go, well, there had to be more than one. Whether you say it's a plan, you don't just bank one guy on it. You have another one firing from the knoll. I believe that there was a shooter from the knoll, or there was someone in front. It's how the windshield got the bullet hole damage on it. But then people bring up the Dow Tex building. I mean, that makes a little bit of sense as well too. That's a better sniper position than that window. I mean, for instance, that window is like you have to really squat down to be able to look throughout it. So I mean, I don't see that as being a smart position. He would have went anywhere else. And then I think the excuse is there's someone that made a statement saying that they got debris or something from the fifth floor on their shirt. And it's like, well, then how does a rifle shoot and then able to shake the whole building to where debris falls and lands on someone's shirt? So that there's more confusion there.
Yeah, you know what was really interesting, Robbie? You mentioned the that sniper's nest, and this is one of the things that struck me when I was at the building, and I was only there for about an hour, but it took me literally less than a minute to find a much smarter sniper's nest on the same floor than what the southeast corner window was. When I was at the window and I was looking down into the kill site, and I said, "Man, this makes no sense. There's the oak tree, the this, the that," and I looked over to my right, and I said, "Huh." Now the building's empty, so I walked across all the windows to the northwest corner window, which is identical, kind of identical to the southeast corner window. But I went to the northwest corner window, and I was able to open the window and look down into the kill site from that window. And I said, "Oh my God, this is so much smarter." I mean, it solves so many things. It takes the oak tree out of the issue. It brings the president's limousine directly to him. He's got a direct shot, unobstructed by anything, right below him. He's got still enough time between there and the overpass to do everything that he wants to do. And even more importantly, after he's finished the shooting, he can drop his rifle if he wants at that window and make a clear cut, unobstructed getaway to the stairwell in the north end of the building. And so when I said northwest, I meant the southwest corner window. I'm sorry. And from that southwest corner window, as opposed to the southeast, where everyone thinks that's where the sniper was, you can make a very clear straight line escape down the stairs, and apparently that's where he met Baker 90 seconds later. This window jumped out at me less than a minute of being there as a much smarter nest. So now we've got Oswald who's worked there for months, 3-4 months, and he's, according to the Warren Commission, he goes up to and he's planning all this out, and he's debating, and he's trying to find his sniper's nest, and he chooses the sixth floor southeast corner window, and he did that with all the time in the world to plot it. And I'm there less than a minute, and I go over and I see a way smarter sniper's nest. If he's the lone assassin, that's the key. That makes a lot more sense. And so, but it was interesting. I went down there in 2018, and I went just into the museum. And you know what? You got that row of windows. Of course, you can't get to the sixth floor window, right? They've got it barricaded. Now they've got the southwest corner window. Not you can go right to the window, but they've got a heavy screen and a dark. It's all riveted and everything else. You cannot look down through the window. That particular window into the kill site. All other windows between the two corners, you can look down into the kill site. You just can't on the southwest or southeast or the southwest corner windows. I found that fascinating. And when I asked the museum people about it, they had no explanation as to why that window was now sealed, and you can't look down into the kill site from it. And so I wrote an article about that on my website through the oswaldwindow.com. And I just found that absolutely fascinating. That is that a coincidence? I don't know.
Has there ever been any explanation of why he took like a bad, I guess, advantage of you at trying to shoot Kennedy? I mean, has there ever been an explanation to choosing that window when he could have had way other? I mean, he had plenty of time. There was, I think it was announced what, 4 or 5 days before in the newspapers that they were going to take that route. So, I mean, if he worked there months before And then that switches over there. That's suspicious. It's not like he just showed up that day or got a job the 2 days before and then, lined up there. He was there months before. So then you start going, okay, so if he knew that Kennedy was coming to Dallas and he was taking that route, he could have easily couple of days stayed up there, be like, nope, this is a way better spot than choosing this thing I'm gonna have to cramp down and shoot from.
Well, that's what occurred to me. And then as I'm standing there, now you go back to 1963 that day, and if you go to the southeast corner window, what we don't see when we look at pictures now of the empty building is that at that time it was filled with boxes of books on the floor, conveyor belts, chairs, desks, all kinds of things. So an assassin leaving from the southeast corner window in that building would have to zigzag and go all kind of way around, all kinds of things to get over to the north corner window, or rather the stairwell, and go down the 4 flights of stairs. Whereas on the southwest corner window that I went over and walked to, it would have been a complete straight line, because on the wall there was desks and there was an alleyway for people to walk. There was no obstruction whatsoever. So you're right. If it makes no sense that whoever it was that chose the sixth floor window, it just baffles me that they would have made that choice as the sniper's nest. And the only thing I can think of is that the from that vantage point, it was easy to stack boxes and things and kind of hide the window from anyone who might happen to come up at that moment when the shots were fired. But then again, when I went over to the southwest corner window, you could do the same. You could have put boxes there, lined them up. Now they may have looked more out of place there than over at the southeast corner window. But that's the only explanation that I have, because both as a sniper's nest could have been easily set up by someone in the know and was smart, and yet I think they chose poorly.
Well, that would be the mindset that if Oswald thought he was going to get away with it.
Exactly, or whoever the lone assassin was. Again, you have to base it on whoever was firing from that position was a lone assassin, and I don't believe that's the case. Of course, I believe, perhaps like you, that there was at least one on the grassy knoll, and I placed another assassin on the Deltex building, the third or fourth floor stairwell. And I think you've got 4 shots with three, from 3 different sniper locations. But again, because the Warren Commission would have us believe that it was one assassin that day, when you're in the building, it's just a stupid choice to be a lone assassin to kill the president of the United States. There's no way around it.
Now, did you follow him after he left the TSBD?
I didn't. My focus at that time, because I had rare access, was both the windows itself, the floor itself, and his escape down in and where he met Officer Marion Baker. And I had a fascinating observation about that. As you know, the Warren Commission would have us believe that Oswald zigged and zagged his way through all the boxes and conveyor belts and got to the north end of the building, stairwell, went down 4 flights of stairs, and got off at the second floor and went into the lunchroom, and was encountered there by Officer Marion Baker, who literally had a gun pointed at his head. And fortunately for Oswald, his boss, Roy Truby, the building superintendent, said to Baker, "Oh, it's okay, he works here." And so they, rather than do anything else, they just left and went up some stairs and went on their merry way. Oswald, I believe, at that time realized that there was a heavy concentration of police that he wasn't expecting, because again, I believe he was involved. And I think he may have even suspected at that time that he was being set up. And that's when he left the building. And I'm not qualified to talk about too much about what he did there. But what was interesting is when I did that test myself, I was 27 at the time. It's fair to say that I was a little bit more fit than I am now. I went down those 6 flights of stairs from the 6th floor window and was able to get down to the second floor lunchroom in the 90 seconds indicated by the Warren Commission. So that was no problem. But there was a problem. And that is, even though I didn't have to zigzag and do all those things, I ran down the stairs. I was there within 90 seconds. But I would not have passed the visual test with an officer pointing a gun at my head. The reason being is by the time I did that, I was not sweating by any means, but I was flush. My cheeks were flush. My palms were a little bit moist. I was slightly out of breath, and so if I had an officer had just come and seen me, I would have looked as suspicious as hell. But Oswald, no, he was cool, calm, collected. It was just like they met happenstance. Oswald passed the visual test that I don't think an assassin from that window could have done. So I believe, as some key witnesses have indicated, that Oswald was in fact on the second floor lunchroom as the or at least the second floor as the assassination was going on, and then he went in, grabbed his bottle of pop, and that's when Officer Baker encountered him. And so that's the problem that I had when I had access to the building. And after that, I didn't pursue it.
I know the second floor lunchroom encounter. There's a couple of people out there, researcher wise, that believe that was all fabricated. It doesn't exist. There's some suspicious stuff. Like, why is the guy with the gun walking behind another guy who doesn't have one? Like that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then this is just an aside. To me, it's kind of funny, but there's a guy at my work who's like, I used to stock Pepsis at that book depository building. He used to stock them all around, like everywhere, I guess in Dallas. Um, and I go, well, that's weird because Oswald was on the second floor with a Coke. That's where they found him. And he goes, there's never been a Coke at that facility. It's always been Pepsi's. And I go, I mean, if that's right, then that's the sixth floor bag of chicken bones and the Dr. Pepper that's up there because Dr. Pepper is a Pepsi product. And I know that's just stupid, but it's just one of those things you hear, especially if you're interested in the assassination, where it's like, that's like a weird, like, small world type thing. It's like when I had a guest on the show and he was on to talk about male mental health. And he goes, I won't say this on the air, but we talk off air a little bit about JFK. I was like, what? He goes, I used to be a busboy where Arnold Inspector used to frequent. And I'm like, what? And he goes, when he would come in, he would sit down and he would ask for his order. And his order was a martini glass with 3 olives placed on a toothpick, perfectly on top, on one single tray, nothing else on the tray, and placed directly in front of him, not off to the side. He would get mad if it was off to the side, directly in front of him. And I go, that's just weird. But that's like that authority thing, that like power thing that I find like really interesting. You see that a lot throughout like a lot of these like government type stuff. There's always this weird like thing that they have going on with them. It was just an aside that I had, but
Well, you know what? It's not so silly because there can be mistakes about Pepsi or Coke or whatever because observations are by eyewitnesses are subject to not being completely ideal. But there was the thing that I believe that there was a confrontation, and the reason I believe it is because of the testimony of Geraldine Reed. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but this is a lady that Robert Groden came across and interviewed her, and it's on tape. And this lady worked on the second floor lunchroom, opposite the second floor lunchroom. In other words, when she looked at her desk, she could look into the second floor lunchroom. And she said to Robert Groden and testified before the Warren Commission, but guess what? They didn't publish her testimony. And here's why. Because she said that that Lee Oswald came up to her at her desk opposite the lunchroom and asked for change for the pop machine. She got him his change, and as that was happening, the shots rang out, according to Geraldine Reed. And they both looked at each other kind of perplexed but said nothing. They didn't realize it was not a motorcycle backfire or whatever, it was gunshots. And then Oswald, she, according to Geraldine Reed, got the coins that he wanted and went into the second floor lunchroom and got his pop. And she did not see the confrontation with Baker and Oswald, only because by the time that happened, somebody had come in and said, Geraldine, you got to, and she got up from her desk and left. But she placed Oswald right in front of her on the second floor at the precise moments the shots were fired. And of course, that means he could not have been on the sixth floor southeast corner window. And that tells us that the incident with Baker is possible because he was there at that within that time frame of it possibly occurring. And so I'm more in tune to believing that it did occur, despite there might be the other tiny fact of Coke versus Pepsi or whatever that's not correct.
The only thing I can think of, and it's not really a rebuttal to that, is that if she got her times mixed up, or when he got the change, and then maybe he took the shot and then made it down to the second floor, which that's a long haul. That's a really long walk for a short drink of water compared to, him being right there when the shots rang out. But then wouldn't anybody hear fucking change when you're running down the steps, jingling in his pocket? Like, you know what I'm saying? So like there's a lot of things that's interesting. I've never heard of her testimony.
Well, the thing that gives it validity to me is that, and the timing of it is that she says that Oswald turned away and walked in toward the lunchroom, and at that very moment, somebody came and said, "Geraldine, Geraldine, you got to see this. Something's going on," and the assassination had just occurred. And so she went out and did her thing, looked or whatever, and then went back to her desk. But the assassination had just occurred, so the timing of it is pretty, I think, precise as far as we can gather.
Now, when it comes to other testimonies at the TSPD, did you look into any other testimonies? I remember looking at his interview, the person that interviewed Oswald, and then later saying that the person that was on the TV was not the person that they interviewed. And that, I mean, that confirms all the other stories we hear about Oswald at a gun range shooting another person's target, saying he's going to do this to the president. So I don't believe it's like, I know some people think MK Ultra. I don't think that. I think it's more someone who was definitely using his name. A couple people probably were. And I mean, there's all those sightings of I saw this person with this description, but it wasn't Oswald, it was someone else. And so that's suspicious in its own. So I mean, that would have been probably investigated in a normal investigation. But when it comes to other TSB D employees, did you look into any others?
Well, I mean, not in depth, but again, you raised the issue of where I was talking about earlier, where I believe that he was associated with the people that set him up. And I believe that deliberately, if all that stuff happened, like if he went to an auto dealership, if he went to a driving range, if it was him in Mexico City or whatever, then it was part of the process of building the case of him being eventually known as the lone assassin of JFK. And so, so again, those are some of the areas that I think that may still be classified because they deal with the government and conspiracy and the CIA and his background in the naval office and all that kind of thing. I mean, his background in the military is bizarre as well. But again, these are the things that I think we still can possibly resolve if any documents are still classified that are to be released, hopefully on December 15th. Then it's those kinds of documents that I think will shed some light on that. But other than that, I think that that it just doesn't surprise me that, and I don't think. Do you think that those things are all fabricated, or do you think there's some substance to all these people pretending to be Oswald?
I definitely think some of that's, I don't think it's fabricated. I definitely think someone's using his name. There's a lot of that citing. It's very descriptive. It's not something like, it would be kind of vague if it was fabricated. I mean, it's easy. What's the haircut style back then? What's the dress style back then? I mean, but the issue is when it's using his name, and then you get a testimony of someone saying that the person that I gave the job to was not the second person I saw in my office. That's another kind of red flag right there. But I think a lot of stuff is really kind of easily explained. The issue starts to become is when you start looking at his interview process, when he's saying, I'm a patsy. Why isn't he shouting from the rooftops that, I didn't do this? He denied the charges, sure. But I mean, he was given a press conference. He was pretty cool about it for the time that they had him up there. And people said, well, he wasn't aware yet. I was like, I mean, he knew something was going on. If you're in handcuffs, something's going on. So, you're going to be shouting your innocence. But that's the intelligence aspect. Was he thinking that someone was going to get him off? Was this just something that he needed to keep quiet, and then the truth will come out? And then you get to obviously the interrogation and the backyard photograph type deal where, is this you? And that's me, but that's not me. Like that's my face, but that's not me. I mean, then you got to look into photo manipulation as well too. Is that a common thing back then?
Yeah, exactly. And you've probably seen the video where he's in police custody, and there's the genuine look of shock on his face because he believed at the time that he was there regarding the Tippit incident, and and a reporter says that he's been charged in the assassination of the president, and it stuns him. And and so does that what does that mean? I don't know, except that whereas he came across as a cool cucumber type of guy. My counter to that is if he was a lone assassin, as the Warren Commission said, why didn't he raise his fist in the air and said, "I did it for Fidel. I did it for whoever, communism." At least he could have been a hero in some part of the world, but he didn't. He just said, "I didn't shoot anybody, and I'm a patsy." And why would he do that if, in fact, that's exactly what he was?
Well, that's what I think when Alan Dulles says that I think he put a book on the table or something and talked about how every assassination in history is done by a lone nutter or one lone assassin, which doesn't make sense because Abraham Lincoln is not one lone assassin. If you look into that, that's a bunch of other things as well too. But the conspiracy aspect,
Yeah. Well, I just want to bring something up if I can, and I hate bringing Hollywood into this because Hollywood is make believe. But I would encourage your audience, Robbie, to watch the movie Shooter with Mark Wahlberg. Now, it's not historical fact; it's complete fabrication. But what it does show is how easy it is for the government and government agencies and low-level people that are associated with that to frame someone in a high-level assassination of a public official. And there's not any part of that aspect of the movie that is far-fetched. In fact, it shocks you at how easy it is to set someone up as a lone assassin. Other than that, take what you will from the movie.
look at the TSBD employees that gave testimony that obviously worked there. If Oswald's been working there for months, that said they didn't know Oswald. And then Bart Camp brings up the good example because he's being charged on killing a cop. Nobody wants to be associated with a cop killer. And it's like, oh yeah, you kind of start seeing like, I mean, especially back then, I mean, there's a couple people obviously at the TSBD that were African American. So then you got, okay, so what's Dallas like in the 63? And I think McBride talks about how some of those guys were openly KKK members. I mean, it wasn't a good, segregation and all that type of thing too. And that's one of the reasons they think Kennedy was, taken out was because of what he was doing for the civil rights movement as well too. I mean, there's a whole bunch of aspects to this when you start looking at why there's a single bullet theory. Why would the government lie or do this type of cover up? Well, I think a lot of people went with it, not just because they're being told to, but the aspect of like they didn't want to go to another world war. I mean, if you look at communism back then, they had ramped the ball up so high that now they got this guy allegedly that kills the president. So it's like it has to be just him, no conspiracy, no mob stuff. We can't and we can't go into all this. We have to keep it with this guy and have it done there. And the issue became now that he was dead, they could easily do whatever they wanted in their investigation without any roadblocks in their way. And they did do that.
Yeah, exactly. If I could leave eventually when we finish up, if I could leave your audience with one thing, and that is, I think that the 60th anniversary coming up, based on evidence that I've seen, is going to rock the JFK assassination world. Chapter 17 of my book, JFK Case Not Closed, deals with a group based in the United States, and they're called DP3D, which stands for Daily Plaza 3D. This is a group of experts who have combined no less than 4 modern technologies not available in 1963 to recreating Daily Plaza and the shots in Daily Plaza, and taking all of the physical evidence, avoiding all speculation of all kinds, all conspiracies of all kinds that are out the window, and instead have focused on the physical evidence in this case, the structural evidence, the building, the window, the rifle, the type of bullet, the position of the limousine on the road, the position of the 2 men in the car. They have applied 4 different technologies to recreate the shots in Daily Plaza. And I was very fortunate in what I saw was stunning. And I saw it at a pretty still immature stage. But they're hoping to come out with a documentary on the 60th anniversary that will simply recreate the shots in Daly Plaza, those 18.6 seconds or whatever from the Zapruder film and the next film, and we will know exactly what happened. And so I'll give you a couple of teasers that I know that are in the book and that they were able to share, willing to share with me. The single bullet theory is hogwash, and they prove it. They prove that it scientifically, to a scientific certainty, that the single bullet theory could not have happened as the Warren Commission said.
Is this the thing John Orr is doing?
Yes,
Okay, I know that
John
is.
Owen.
They're coming
Yep,
on to
and
talk about it. So
yeah, and also that he claims and says he will document and show that John Connolly himself was hit by two different bullets from two different assassins, both of whom obviously had to be at rear. And so I am really excited about this. I think this is a game changer. I think that this could very well lead to an official reinvestigation, because I think it will be accepted critically for what it is and the quality that it is, and I think that will be the beginning of the end of Oswald being known in the history books as the lone assassin of John F. Kennedy.
why so optimistic? Like I've done 1,300 of these shows, and it's not all just JFK stuff. I talk to people who study AI, programmers, London Board of Futurist people who study the transhumanist movement, people that have dived in all realms of technology. Um, when you program those simulation things, it's whatever the data gets put into it. And if they're still inputting the wrong data, coming with a conclusive answer. I mean, even with conspiracy stuff, it's kind of all hearsay. You can have a simulation that's programmed to do whatever the hell you want. I mean, it can make you a pixie, it can make you a unicorn, it can make you whatever you want. It's not true, but it's just with the information that you put in it to make it do that. I think even with technology today, it's much like the acoustic evidence. I mean,
Well, this is I can tell you that that's certainly what John Orr believes, that all these videos out there and these recreations out there are pretty much nothing more than cartoons, because of the very reasons you just cited. They take it way further. They take, for instance, uh, they don't they don't say, well, what if JFK was positioned this way? What they do is they take all the photographs, all the angles of Daly Plaza, the position of the car. They measure everything from every um, photograph and the film, and they went down and measured Daly Plaza to within literally a millimeter of the building, the window itself, the Stemmons Freeway sign, the trees on the grass, the people on the curbs. Everything they did was based on physical scientific evidence that existed, and applying these four different technologies: laser scanning, uh, photographs by drones, a process called photogrammetry, which means you can take a two-dimensional photograph or Zapruder film, and you can extract information from it to turn it into a 3D. So you're not messing with the information, you're using the actual physical evidence that's before you, and just using modern technologies to get greater detail from it. And I think that that's the process that they've applied to this, that makes it different. I think we're going to see that. Will they be criticized? Of course, because it'll show Oswald could not have been the lone assassin of JFK, and people just won't accept that. But when you look at the sciences behind it and what they did, and the details that they went through to recreate Daly Plaza and the shots in Daly Plaza, it is mind blowing. And I think that someone like you, that's done so much looking into this, will really have an appreciation for what's about to come into public view. Hopefully on the 60th anniversary. I hope they're on target.
I saw a podcast that they did, and I reached out to speak with them, and we're planning something. But I'm like I said, that stuff to me, it's just like the acoustic evidence. It just it gets rejected by both sides. I just don't know if it doesn't fit people's individual theories. I'm the type that's not going to stand in somebody's way if they're going to show a point like this. I just bring in some, I wouldn't say play devil's advocate, but I just kind of think of obvious questions I'm going to have that maybe a general public might have as well too, or someone that studies that. But I mean, if it helps open up or get people's interest into it. That's the main thing. Like trying to get the public interested into something like this, especially something so far back. I mean, it's not really hard to do, but it's just about making sure that you kind of show them things that leave them kind of like, well, that's not what I heard. And then showing them proof that what they're being told or what they were told. I learned in a junior year of high school. You see 15, whatever. I saw a 15-minute class on like they just showed the Zapruder film, and then my teacher explained for an extra 10 minutes, and then that was it. And then now that I'm started diving into it, it's always been a fascinating topic for me. I've talked about it years ago that I wanted to finally get someone on to speak about it. But that was the thing. I didn't know where to look, didn't know where to go. And then you eventually just move on to something else, or just a couple minutes later, you end up forgetting about it. But then once you dive into it, consumes your whole life because you realize it's much like stuff that came later: the assassination of MLK, the assassination of RFK, the assassination of Fred Hampton, all these things, the official story, there's way more detail that does not get told. And whether you want to say it's a summary or it's, oh, they had to give, something for people that aren't going to do the full reading of it. It's like, yeah, but you're blindingly manipulating facts. You're kind of adding a bunch of crucial, or I wouldn't say crucial, but you're leaving out a bunch of crucial things compared to what the real story is, or what I would say what the truth is. And then whenever you get into the topic of the truth, people go, oh, that's conspiracy talk, and they roll their eyes. I'm like, damn, like how do you, I just had the other day, when I was saying Oswald was intelligence, there's a guy I was telling at my work about that. When I had Blakey on, I told him about my episode, and he kind of like conspiracy and rolled his eyes. And then not even the other day, there was an article or something, Fox News or Newsweek put up Oswald was intelligence. There's more evidence to show that now. And he goes, hey, do me a favor, write your podcast on a piece of paper. And I'm like, well, now I'm not a conspiracy theorist because a news outlet said it. And it's like, just look at the evidence. Once you start looking at everything, it doesn't add up. And I'm happy that there's someone like you that wrote a couple of books on it as well, too. And I mean, like I said, even if you believe it's mafia, if you believe it's a group effort, if you believe Oswald did have some small part to play, the main point is if you identify on the ability of conspiracy or the agreement of conspiracy, find the common ground and let the public into the conversation, because that's not what the community is doing right now. And I'm happy that you gave me your time to be able to talk about your books and also some of your research as well too. I really appreciate that. But I got one final question for you. Penn Jones and Mary Farrell, I need to know about their personalities. I hear about them. McBride believes Mary Farrell was an intelligence asset. Do you believe that she might have had some type of connection like that? Or do you believe that she was just very interested into both sides of the assassination? Because she did publish both works, Sloan Nutter stuff and conspiracy stuff.
Well, it's funny. I found her to be fascinating, and I had no sense that she was an intelligent asset of any kind. But Penn Jones Jr. thought she was,
Okay.
and
Why
what
did he
he
drop you off at her house?
well, because he just knew that he also regarded her as an authentic and terrific researcher. And of course, her website now that has outlived her has proved that to be the case. It's remarkable as a resource site for the assassination. And so Mary was, I couldn't get a word in edgewise because she was so consumed in this. But it was funny because it was complete chaos in her home with all these newspaper articles and documents, all kinds of things all over the place. But she could go anywhere she wanted in the room if she wanted to show me something and get exactly what she was looking for and find it. It was the most chaotic filing system I've ever come across. And she could just talk to you about the assassination of JFK for hours, and we did. And I'll always be grateful for that time that I had, whether it was only the one occasion, I regret to say. And Penn Jones was really a character. He was, you've seen him on some interviews. Well, he was just like that in person. He was dynamic. He was outgoing. He was combative. If he didn't believe, he was very emotional, and he would just he would fight to make his point to you as much as needed, and very generous in giving of his time. He took me to the police station basement, Parkland Hospital, the Tippett thing, and we did from the book depository all the way through Oswald's tracks, and of course Daly Plaza. And boy, he was really upset with me because when I went down there that one year in 1979, that's when I got in the book depository building, and not even he'd been able to do it. And so when I told him that, he just, oh, you got to get me in there. You got, I couldn't get him in. They just wouldn't do it. And I think it's because he was well known to them and they considered him to be a bit of a nut. And they just didn't wanted him to have no part of getting in the building. So I gave him all the information that I did. I wrote some stuff for his newsletter, the Continuing Inquiry, and he in turn gave me a film that he and Robert Groden put together on the assassination, which I've shown at hundreds of seminars in Canada. And but I'll even though I didn't spend an ample amount of time with either one, they if you ever met someone, Robbie, that you spent a little time with, but the impression still lasts, that's where I am with Penn Jones Jr. and Mary Farrell.
Well, Dave, I really appreciate the time you gave me to chat on my show, man. Seriously, it means a lot. Is there a place where people can find any of your links?
Sure. If you go to throughtheoswaldwindow.com, there's all kinds of articles there that I've written over the years. Both of my books are available on line there, or you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever bookstore you want to use. And but if you go to throughtheoswaldwindow.com, there's everything there that you could possibly need. And I appreciate you mentioning that.
I'm gonna link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks for listening to this episode of Out the Blank Podcast.